All right, well, welcome back once again to the Apartment Building Wealth Generation System. We are now in module number 4. We have already gone through 3 modules where you've learned why you want to be investing with apartment buildings, looking at what do you buy, and we spent some time where do you buy, where should you be looking to buy. So today what we will be looking at is how do I actually buy it. We'll go through the 4 steps of what you can afford, what's available in the market, how to analyze the property, and then making the actual offer. Module 5 will get into more detail about analyzing a real deal. Module 6 we'll talk a little bit more about making the actual offer. And Module 7, once you own your first property, now what? And that's a very important lesson because the first year of every new acquisition is what I call a transition year. It's never what you really expect. So you need to be prepared for that. And of course, property management, which is key and critical to your success. Module 3, we gave you some homework. We asked you to review the attached building inspection as well as take a look at the dogs and stars document, start researching some potential investment locations. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. With the respect to the building inspection report, don't be cheap on these. A lot of people will try and save a couple $100s, and this having a good inspection is critical for your success because it can cost you thousands and thousands of dollars if you get involved in a transaction or a deal and it turns out to be a dog simply because the inspector that you hired was incompetent, not capable, or qualified enough to do their job properly. I got caught in this trap early on in my investing, and I ended up buying a property. It was a 16-unit building which had mold in the attic and mold in one particular room in the basement, which the inspector sort of glazed over, didn't really pick up on. He didn't inspect all of the apartments, and as a result there was an apartment that had a small fire in it, which cost me $5,000 to repair after the fact. So there was a lot of things. It could have potentially cost me a lot of money for that particular property. Fortunately, I was able to sell it just a year after I bought it, and I was able to basically pass those problems on to the next purchaser and provided full disclosure, but they were willing to take that task on. So don't be cheap with your building inspection reports. Make sure you get a good qualified individual that can do the job for you. With respect to the dogs and stars document, this again is just a guideline. In my opinion, the availability of good quality property management is always first. You need to be able to count on good quality property management because it doesn't really matter where you're buying. Everybody needs a place to live, even in the depressed markets. But if you don't have good property management available for you in those markets, it doesn't matter whether it's a good, bad, or market or anything in between. Property management can be your downfall. You want to avoid the dying towns in the markets out there where they only have the elderly remaining and the young are leaving town. So you want to make sure that the town is at least stable. It doesn't have to be growing, but it needs to at least be stable. If it's shrinking, then that's a major concern. In Ontario, where I invest, and a lot of people across Canada know the story about Thunder Bay and Windsor. These are 2 medium-sized cities that have been stagnant for years, and Windsor in particular goes up and down. It's very cyclical because of the automotive industry. But the point is, these cities, or cities like these, they'll never die. They'll just simply suffer. So you need to be aware of that and understand that. Always buy for the right price and make sure you've got great property management. And then with respect to the profit centers, even in a depressed market, most of the profit centers apply. So cash flow, you're always buying for cash flow regardless of the market conditions. You can always enjoy instant equity when you buy properly. Leveraging is always available to you no matter what market you buy in, because you're using other people's money, the bank's money or partners. Principal pay down, when you're paying down the mortgage on the property, it doesn't matter what market you're located in, you're still enjoying that profit center. Depreciation, should you choose to use it, is always an option. Plus you've got the opportunity to refinance and reinvest in your property in other markets as well. So these 6 profit centers are available to you no matter what the market conditions are like, depressed markets or booming markets. Appreciation is a little bit of the wild card though. You want to make sure that, you don't buy simply for appreciation. In my opinion, appreciation is like the cream or the bonus. Would I like to enjoy appreciation? Absolutely. Will I look for it? For sure I will. But my focus is the first 6 profit centers, and the appreciation I just consider to be the cream or the bonus. And the bottom line is that property management is the key to your success, whether you manage the property and manage it well, or whether you have a property management company managing the property. Good property management will make all the difference in the world. It'll lower your expenses. It will lower your maintenance expenses. It'll lower your vacancies and increase the profitability of the property, and therefore increase the cash or the value of the property as well. Okay, so let's get on to today's lesson. We're going to be taking a look at what you can actually afford, what's available out there in the market, how to analyze a deal, and then actually making an offer. So our objective here is to understand what cash you may have available to you for investing, whether it be yours or somebody else's cash, and then knowing how much real estate you can buy with the amount of cash that you have available to you. So you can afford anything if it cash flows, but where do you get the money for the down payment from? So money can come from a variety of different sources. It can come from your own cash, it can come from a line of credit or RSPs. So the cash, when you're using your own cash, we'll get into this in more detail, but you have to understand that by using your cash, there's lost value in that you could take your cash and invest it in another investment property or another investment vehicle and be earning 2, 3, 5%. So when you are using your cash, you have to factor in the cost of your own money. Lines of credit, now there's a couple different types of lines of credit. They're secured against an asset or not secured. When it's secured against an asset, you have lower interest rates because the bank feels more secure in lending that money to you because it is secured by, it could be your house, it could be another investment property, whatever the case, but they have some sort of security. When it's not secured, you typically have a higher interest rate. It's 2 or 3 points higher than a secured. And the not secured line of credit is lent to you based upon your credit history. That's why your credit score is so critical and important. You want to make sure you are very credit worthy. The key when using your lines of credit, either secured or not secured, is you do not mix business with personal. What you want to do is make sure that if you have a line of credit and you've used it for personal purposes in the past, then pay the debt off quickly, because you're able to use the interest cost as a business expense. But if you've got it with personal and business mixed in there, then your accountant's not going to be able to know how much of the interest payments that you're making can be slotted towards your business and how much has to remain personal. So it's best if you just keep it for business, and if you need a personal line of credit for personal stuff, then get a second line of credit, but keep them separate. You may be called in. The thing with lines of credit, there's tighter lending rules equals lower loan to value as well. So talk it to your lender, your mortgage broker, about how this applies to you. The other thing is, a lot of people think a line of credit is like a mortgage. It's like a loan. And now it is a loan, it's not a mortgage. And as it being that it's a loan, the lender has the right and the ability to call that loan in at any time, or to change the rates and terms of that loan as well. So they could give you notice and say that at the end of the month, the interest rate's going to be increased by 0.5%, and there's nothing you can do about it. Or they could give you notice and say that you've got 60 days to pay out your line of credit because we are no longer offering lines of credit. Now, this doesn't happen very often, but you do need to realize that this is a real risk. This is why a mortgage is often better, simply because they can't call a mortgage in unless you are in default. You've stopped making payments, or you've broken the rules that they have put in place for you. They may not renew the mortgage when it comes up for renewal, but they can't call it in without any reason. Plus, they can't change the interest rates as well during that term. So that gives you a little bit more peace of mind. The challenge is that if you don't have something to invest that second mortgage in right away to start generating an income, you have to make mortgage payments. Whereas with a line of credit, you don't make any payments on that line of credit until you actually use it. So there's pros and cons with both. You just need to understand the differences. Then there's RSPs. A lot of people don't know or understand that they have the opportunity to invest their RSPs in real estate. A lot of people are led to believe, and the industry leads us to believe, that the only place that makes sense to invest your RSPs is into the mutual fund markets. And the reason they do this is that that's where they make their money. If you were to invest your RSPs into real estate, that's not going to be beneficial for all of the financial advisors and the fund groups. But the reality is, you can use your own RSPs to invest in your own real estate. However, the rules are that this would need to be in first position. In other words, the mortgage that you create with your RSPs would have to be in first place, and you'd only be able to finance up to 80% of the value of that property. And the challenge with that is you still need 20% of money from some other source to fund the down payment. And the other thing is, it needs to be insured as well. Even though it's at 80% loan to value, the rule is that they want it to be insured. So there's going to be a cost to insure that mortgage as well. The other, and I think a better option, is to invest in other people's properties. When you invest in other people's properties, you have the opportunity to invest your money in either first, second, or third position, and you are able to go up to 100% loan to value with some lenders. However, they are starting to get a little bit finicky on that, and they are now saying 90% loan to value for most of the lenders out there. You're able to use others secured against principal residence instead of a line of credit. So, for example, you could have a friend who's got RSPs, and they could register their RSPs in the form of a second mortgage against your principal residence. So instead of taking out a line of credit against your house, you can use somebody else's line of credit or RSPs rather, to register against you. You could then borrow the money from them, or you could invest your RSPs against your friend's property. And so there's different ways of leveraging your RSPs. The nice thing about this is that you can become the bank for yourself and for your friends as well. So here's a brief example. Your brother Jimmy has $200,000 in RSPs, and he agrees to invest $100,000 as a second mortgage with one of your investor buddies, Bob. Bob now has $100,000 which he can use to invest in another deal, or he could joint venture with you to help you buy a deal. So this becomes a win-win. In this particular case, Jimmy may have no interest in investing in real estate himself. He might be busy with his own career, but he's got these RSPs that are underperforming, so he agrees to invest some of it in the form of a second mortgage. That's a win for him. It's in a good, secure investment. Bob, who now has this $100,000 registered against his property, he can go and invest that into another property, another investment, or get started investing in real estate by accessing the equity in his home. Or he could work with you and joint venture in something. So this is a win-win for everybody. You need to understand what your credit worthiness is. Before I became educated in investing in real estate, I didn't even realize that I had a credit score and what that was all about. And I had a major shock the first time I pulled my credit report because I don't recall exactly how many credit cards I had on file, but I had probably 25 or 30 credit cards on file. Now this is when I was about 40 years of age. So I had lots of time to build up all these credit cards. And these credit cards can show up when you go into a mall and they have this promo. Sign up for this credit card today and you get 5% off your purchases. So I would think, why not? 5% off is great. I had no idea what applying for that credit card was doing to my score. Every time you have a credit card, what happens is if you've got 5 credit cards and each one has a maximum limit of $10,000 on it, when the bank looks at you to see about your credit worthiness, they're going to and how much you can afford to borrow, they're going to say, okay, you've got 5 credit cards, each at $10,000. You could max those out at $50,000 total. Therefore, had you not had those credit cards, we would have lent you $200,000. But because you have those credit cards, we're only going to lend you $150,000. So those credit cards can really reduce the amount of money that you can borrow. Plus, every time you apply for a credit card or a service like a cell phone or open up a new account with a utility company, these people are always going to be doing a credit search on you. And every time you have a credit search, that has a negative impact on your credit score. So your credit score could be at 700. You go shopping for a mortgage, you go to 4 different banks. All of a sudden, your credit score goes from 700 down to 650. Now, I don't know if those are the exact numbers. I'm just using that as an example. So that's why you want to use a mortgage broker versus a bank, because you're not going to have that multiple hit on your credit report. So my credit report is extremely valuable to me because without good credit, I can't borrow money, period. So learn what your credit score is. You can go to Equifax or TransUnion. Equifax seems to be a little bit more popular than TransUnion. You can go online and download your report immediately if you pay them $20 to $25. Now, when you do this, I highly recommend you also click the little button that will say, do you want your credit score or beacon score? And that's extremely important for you as well. So this, for example, the credit score you see there of 720, that would be your beacon score. You want to know what that number is. And when you download this yourself, you're going to be given a very comprehensive report which will give you some credit tips, how to manage your credit, etc. So this is a good thing to do on an annual basis. You'll then see all of the different credit cards, all of the different searches that have been performed, and you can manage your credit much better knowing this. You can then go in and ask to have all of those credit cards canceled, and by doing that, in my particular case, I think my score jumped about 50 points within a week, simply because by me going in and asking for my credit cards to be canceled at my request, that showed Equifax and TransUnion that I was being more responsible, and they were rewarding me for being responsible by giving me a higher score then. Your net worth, if you're going to be going for insured financing, They ask for a net worth of $100,000. That's not overly difficult to achieve unless you're brand new investing and getting out there. And if you don't have that net worth, that's where a joint venture partner may come into play. You want to get yourself pre-qualified with your lenders, and when you're talking commercial, again, it's not so much about you as it is the properties. However, there is still an element, maybe 20% of it, they still look at you. So you want to understand what your credit worthiness is and what the risk level is from the lender's perspective, so that you can perhaps change that if it's negative. Also, what partners do you have available to you, whether they be money partners or joint venture partners? And what you need to do is create a list of everybody you know, and beside their names, write down how much money you think they potentially have. And people don't like to talk or share about their personal finances, so you're going to have to do your best guess. You might over the course of a couple of years living next door to your neighbor Bob, through casual conversation, you've got a sense that he's got a few $100,000 in his retirement fund tied up in mutual funds, and he's not very happy with that. Well, there's a prime candidate to approach to see if they would be interested in doing some financing through RSP mortgages. Then you have to understand how much is actually required in order to buy a property. So when you're buying a residential house for investment purposes, you need to have 20% down. Once you get into the commercial residential, which is what we're focusing on here, it changes a little bit. If you're not using insured financing, you're just going to a bank and getting conventional commercial financing, they may require you to have 25 to 40% of the value of that property as your down payment. The reason being is that the banks consider this to be a higher risk investment for them, so they want you to have more skin in the game. Depending on the tenant mix or the commercial mix, whether you've got mixed use commercial, will dictate the amount of money that you need to have down, as well as the age, condition, and location of the property. All these factors will be taken into consideration by the lender, and then they will tell you, well, in this particular case, we want you to have 30% down on the property. If you are able to go through an insured lender like CMHC, for example, then they will allow you to put as little as 15% down. However, it's 15% of what the lender believes the value of that property is. So for example, if the property in this picture is for sale for $1 million and I pay $1 million for it, but CMHC does their analysis of the property, and in their opinion they believe it's only worth $900,000, then they will finance up to 85% of the $900,000. So that's something to be aware of as well. And that's why it's very important to understand how the lenders evaluate properties. In my particular case, I've taken that into consideration. So when I do my analysis of properties, the numbers, the results will come in very, very close, similar to what CMHC's numbers will be. So here's an example of what you could potentially buy. If you have $100,000 cash available to invest, and the bank is requiring you to put 30% down, that means you're only going to be able to afford to buy a property worth $333,000, which in my particular market might buy you a building like this fourplex. However, if you go with the insured lenders and you're able to put just 15% down, that means you're able to buy twice as much of a property. So that puts you up into a small apartment building. Now, when you're taking a look at insured financing, a lot of people's immediate response is, whoa, the insurance cost is way too expensive, especially when you start getting into larger transactions. So, for example, here we've got this is an extreme property, but we've got a market value of $8.5 million. Doesn't matter about the numbers, it's still relevant, and we're comparing apples and apples here. So we have a building that's worth $8.5 million, existing mortgage debt of $4.5, net operating income of $575,000, So there's a requested loan at 75% loan to value. In other words, they want to put a new mortgage on this property worth $6,375,000. The insurance premium for this particular loan at that loan to value ratio is 2.25%. That means it's going to cost the borrower $143,000 to borrow that mortgage. Plus there's application fees as well. So we're now talking $155,000 in premiums and application fees. So that means our total loan is going to jump up to $6.53 million instead of $6.375. However, that's where most people will stop, because they just say, well, there's no way I'm paying that kind of extra money for the insured if I don't have to. What people don't realize, though, is that the lenders will reward you with a lower interest rate if you go through the insured financing. So in this particular example, they're saying that if you don't use the insured financing, they will lend you the 6.375 at 5.5%. However, if you do use insured financing, we will lower that interest rate to 4.25%. Now, your annual principal and interest on a 25-year amortization on this mortgage is $466,944 at a 5.5% interest rate. At the 4.25% interest rate, those payments drop down to just under $423,000. Your cash flow, because you're paying less to the banks, your cash flow is going to increase significantly. And in this case, you're going to make $44,000 additional cash flow. Well, in order to get that additional $44,000, it cost you $155,000. So within 3.5 years, you've made more cash flow than it cost you to do the insured financing. So if you have a 5-year term, then you will be ahead of the game. If you have a 3-year term, it's going to cost you money. So you need to be aware of the reality, and not the golden rule, but the general rule of thumb is that in order to make insured financing work, you have to be financing for a term of 5 years or more. If you're financing it for under 5-year term, then the cost for borrowing is going to be greater than the reward or the benefit. This is a sheet from the CMHC with some of their criteria. So you can see for rental properties with 7 or more units, what they're looking for is a 1.2 net income debt ratio. So if you take a look on my analyzer, and we'll see in more detail later, you'll see that I use that 1.2 threshold as well. As I say, I understand what CMHC is looking for, so I built my analyzer to reflect that. Mentioned that you're able to go up to 85% loan to value on a property, and the insurance premium, the cost to borrow that money, goes up to 4.5%. When it was at 75% loan to value, as in the previous example, it was at 2.25%. So the cost for borrowing goes up. So again, you have to do the math. The point here, though, is that a lot of people fail to realize is that yes, it's 4.5%, but now instead of buying, you might have the cash to put 30% down, but I would rather buy 2 properties with 15% down on each property, because I get to enjoy the profit centers of 2 properties versus 1. So you need to look at all of the different effects that this has. You're also able to amortize for longer periods of time. If you don't use insured financing, the banks will not amortize the mortgage for any more than 25 years. If you use insured financing and the insurer agrees, they have to agree to it, they will insure up to 40 years. Now, if it's a brand new build, they will definitely go up to 40 years. But if you're dealing with a 40-year-old property, they might say, we're not going to do 40 years, we'll allow you to go up to 30 years. Now, for every 5-year increase in amortization, there is an additional cost to the insurance. So I don't recall off the top of my head. I think it's like 0.25. So if I go up to a 30-year amortization at 85% loan to value, instead of it being 4.5% cost for that loan, it's now 4.75%. The insured lenders will go first, second, or in pari passu. I can't pronounce that. It's a different type of financing for bridge financing or construction loans. For non-residential, not to exceed 20% of the gross floor area. So what this means is you could have a mixed-use building, and it could still qualify for insured financing, providing the commercial non-residential component doesn't exceed 20% of the gross floor area. So if you have a 4-story apartment building and on the main floor there's a small convenience store, chances are that convenience store will not exceed 20% of the gross floor area. Therefore, it will still qualify for insured financing. All right, now if you have a money partner, you may still need to have excellent credit and a net worth. It depends on, just simply because you don't have cash, you still need to manage your credit and your net worth. If you're going to be on title with the partner, you will definitely need to have good credit and net worth as well. Your money partner will also need to have excellent credit and net worth in order to qualify. So just because your buddy's got $100,000 or $200,000 cash to use for a down payment, if they've got terrible credit, then it's all for nothing, because the bank's going to look at their credit worthiness as well. It's also difficult for money partners to be silent, so you need to be aware of who you select for your partners. If you are borrowing $100,000 from a money partner, a good friend of yours, and that's all of their savings, they don't have any more savings other than that, then I would suggest or recommend you don't do it, because your friend is going to be extremely nervous because that's all they have. However, if they've got $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 in savings and they're lending you $100,000, they're going to be much more comfortable, because I would suggest that they are more financially educated and they understand the investing, and they're more likely to become a silent partner. You also need to understand and realize that there's rules and regulations both in Canada and the US. In Canada, it's called FINTRAC, and this has been put in place to allow the government to track where the money comes from, because real estate is a very easy place for money laundering to take place, and for funding terrorist activities, around the world as well. So in order to be able to control this, the government asks for a FINTRAC, and these records, if you're dealing with a real estate agent, the real estate agents by law are required to fill out these FINTRACs. If you're dealing with the lawyers, they're going to be filling out FINTRACs as well. And for the down payment, what they want to know is, where did the money come from, who's supplying it, and they're going to look back for at least 3 months to see where that money came from. So if you think that your brother-in-law Bob can just simply put $100,000 into your bank account the week before closing on the transaction, and you and your brother-in-law have a side agreement on how you're going to pay him back, then the banks aren't not going to accept that, because they're going to say, well, where did that money come from? They want proof to know where that money came from. However, if it was sitting in your bank account for 4 months, over 3 months, so say 4 months, then they won't question where it came from. They're going to assume that it is your money, and it's much easier to deal with. When you're joint venturing with a partner with you on title, all parties will need to qualify and be on title. People ask me all the time, well, what should the split be? Should it be 50-50? Well, the reality is it can be whatever the two parties agree upon. You have to make sure that your investor is happy and satisfied with the return, whatever it be. If this is your absolute first deal and you're just getting started, what I would suggest you do is you take a smaller split. Take a a smaller percentage of the deal to build some credibility, some trust, and experience. So you could start out with 5 or 10% of the deal, give the lion's share to your investor. Once that deal is done, your investor is going to say, oh, that was fantastic, let's do that again. Well, okay, let's do it again, but there's got to be more in it for me. So you work your way up to 50-50. Again, depending if the numbers have to make sense for both sides. You always want to under-promise and over-deliver for your partners. So if, for example, the rate of return that your goal is to give your investment partner is a 10% return on their investment, and they're happy with that, when it comes time to pay them out, if you can afford to give them 12, 13, 15% return on their investment, I would suggest you do so, because they're going to be extremely happy with the results and want to reinvest with you again. Using a joint venture with you not on title, so this would take place if you have bad credit or no jobs. It's still done by a lot of investors. The problem is you have less protection because you're not on title. So the nice thing about this, though, is there's no limit to the number of properties you can buy. It's only limited by the number of joint venture partners you can bring into the fold. So the joint venture partner simply qualifies for the mortgage, and they go on title, and technically the property is theirs. What you then do is you create an agreement between you and the investor prior to actually buying the property. It's a joint venture agreement which you then register on title after the purchase. But you're not registered on title as the owner. It's only the agreement that's registered on title. It's still not as good as being on title yourself. However, if the investor decides to sell the property, which they're entitled to do because it is their property, if they sell that property, you have a legal binding contract you can then take them to court with. Again, the split can be whatever you negotiate with the investor. There's really no limit to it. What percentage do you give or ask for? Well, again, it depends on the deal. It depends on where you're at with your investing experience. It depends on so many different factors. But the bottom line is ask what they expect and give them what they want if you can make it work. And then when the opportunity comes to pay them out, you give them a little bit more. So it's now clear that in order to leverage your own down payment and get the biggest bang for your buck, 15% down with insured funding is best. That's my opinion. There's still lots of students, lots of people doing it without insured financing. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's whatever works for you. If you don't have any cash, then not a problem. That shouldn't stop you. You just need a money partner. And how you share the deal is entirely up to you and the partner. Just make sure it's a win-win for both of you. The more you bring to the table, the more you can ask for. So simply bringing the deal to the table is not necessarily enough to justify a 50% split in the deal. If you were to bring the deal to the table, manage the deal, structure the deal, make it completely hands-off for the investor and effortless, all they have to do is show up at the bank and the lawyers to sign paperwork, etc. The more easy you make it for your investor, the more you can ask for in return. All right, so let's take a look at what's available. So our objective here is to identify where you should be looking and in what price range. Once a market has been identified, then a road trip will likely be necessary to confirm the market conditions as well as to build your A team. And your team is extremely important. So when you're looking at where, you have to ask yourself, what are you buying? What's the reason you're buying? Are you buying for appreciation or are you buying for cash flow? Personally, I'm always focusing on cash flow. However, a lot of people do focus on appreciation, and we're talking about market appreciation, not forced appreciation. So appreciation where you just buy a property and the property goes up year after year simply because other properties in that market are going up as well. So some of the appreciating market conditions are as follows. You need to look for strong economic indicators. Lots of immigration. Are there more people moving into that area that you're investing in than leaving? Is there low unemployment? Is there new industry coming? What is the political environment like? Are they very progressive, or are they like in my neighborhood where they just shut down any new potential opportunities and make it very difficult to invest in a market like that? Is there a low percentage of rental properties compared to the number of tenants looking for rental properties? So if you are investing in a market that has less than 30% of the housing for rentals, then that is a good prime indicator that the values of those properties could go up. However, what I find is that when you are looking to buy in markets with strong for appreciation, you tend to have more competition. Now, I know that there's some investing groups out there who teach to buy for appreciation. Therefore, they identify markets that are potentially going to appreciate over the next 1, 2, 5 years, and that's all good and fine if you can identify those markets and invest in those markets, providing the cash flow. But in this particular case, these groups were not teaching cash flow, they were teaching appreciation. And in some cases, some of the instructors will even say, don't worry about the cash flow because you're going to make more money on the appreciation when you sell it next year than you would have with the cash flow. The challenge is that this is a much higher risk strategy because if the market changes, and it can change very, very quickly, then you have the ability of not achieving those predicted returns. So for myself, I'm always focusing on cash flow. I'm looking for stable markets. Does not have to have growth. Growth is great if it happens, but I'm not looking for growth. Higher vacancies is a good opportunity as well because when I buy that property, I'm looking at turning it around with good property management. So at the time of purchase, it doesn't really matter about a high vacancy, providing I believe I can turn things around. More stable in fluctuating markets as well. So if you're buying in a depressed market and the countrywide economic conditions slow down, it's going to have less impact in that depressed market because it already is depressed. So it's hard to get any worse. You're more likely to achieve your predicted returns because, again, you're not going to have this fluctuation. You also have less competition. So it's more appealing for a lot of new investors to invest in markets that are appreciating because they see the big dollar signs, and it's very tempting. And I get that. And when back in the run up from 2006 to 2008 in Western Canada, the market conditions were crazy. The markets were going up by 10, 15, 20, 30% in certain markets. And sitting back in Eastern Ontario, where the markets were still only going up 3 to 5% a year, I was looking out west with envy, and I was tempted, yet I didn't bite. I continued to invest in my market where I was comfortable with, and I was focusing on the cash flow and the modest appreciation. As a result, I missed out on a lot of opportunity to make large chunks of cash, but I also avoided the risk of losing everything, like several investors that I know of who, when the market dropped in 2008, they were stuck with a large portfolio of properties and they were unable to carry those properties for an extended period of time, and as a result they ended up filing for bankruptcy and they lost everything. So there's more properties available in these more depressed markets. You've got fewer buyers looking at those because it's not as appealing. Therefore, there's more opportunities. So I love cash flow. Cash flow, as Robert Kiyosaki says, is king, and appreciation is just the icing on the cake. Now, where do you start looking? I've broken it down into 3 categories. So you're going to look at within an hour and a half drive of your home versus a 3-hour drive. So simply take a map of your where you live, draw a circle on the map within 150 kilometers of your home, and identify all of the communities that are of interest in that zone. You can then expand that to a 3-hour drive, draw a circle on your map for a 300-kilometer radius, and identify the communities there. but you need to add in the property management component here, because it's going to be more difficult for you to manage these properties. You're most likely going to want a property management company in place. So if you're looking at a community of 2,000 people, for example, the likelihood of there being a property management company there is going to be slim to none. You can look at these other communities, like the 2,000 to 5,000 in population. They may work as long as you are prepared to do long distance driving. I have done that to manage the property, or with part-time management or on-site management as well. So you may not have a good quality property management company, but you could still work with them on a part-time basis to manage it long distance. So here's an example of where I live. I live in the town of Almont, which isn't exactly in the center of that interesting shape. That shape is not truly a hour and a half from me, because we have the Ottawa River that separates the province of Ontario and Quebec. So my circle does not include Quebec, simply because investing in Quebec is good. However, I would strongly suggest that you speak the language and understand it's a very different game. Rules and regulations are very different in Quebec versus Ontario. So you need to be aware of that as well. So in my particular case, from where I live, the city of Ottawa was well within my 1.5 hour driving, all the way to Cornwall, down past Kingston, and all the way up to Pembroke. And the major cities or communities to invest in would be Pembroke, Renfrew, Perth, Smith Falls, Brockville, Kingston, and Cornwall. The Nepean and Ottawa market were just too expensive, so I never really spend much time looking there. So I have invested in Cornwall, I have invested in Kingston. Currently my properties, the bulk of my properties, are located in Smith Falls and Brockville. Then you'll see down to the left there, you'll see Picton, which is actually a 2 hour, 15-minute drive. That's where we own 54 townhomes in that particular community. This is a case where we hired a property manager to manage the properties, but we weren't happy with their services, so we only hired them part-time to do certain things. And we managed it long distance with the help of the local management company. Plus, we had a very good not initially, but it took us a year or two to find a really good handyman who also helped with some of the management issues and made it manageable for the long distance. Now, when you start looking beyond that, you start looking across the country, a 5-hour flight, whatever the case may be, to get across the country. You could be looking, for example, in Ontario. For myself, that would include Thunder Bay, Sault Ste. Marie, Sudbury, North Barrie, Sarnia, Windsor, London, Hamilton, St. Catharines, Belleville, Kingston, and beyond. It would also include the East Coast. So I jump over Quebec and I start looking at St. John's, Fredericton, Moncton, Charlottetown, Halifax, St. John's, New Brunswick, St. John's, Newfoundland. All of these communities are now open to me to consider investing in. Of course, I can go west as well. The thing, when you're looking at a 5-hour flight or more, what you want to do is I start off by identifying the larger centers, so focus on 80,000 plus. And the reason being is that a city of that size is going to be much more stable, plus you're also going to have better opportunity to acquire good quality property management companies. Use the stars and dog form to help identify the market conditions in each city, and then rank these cities in order of preference for investing. What you're wanting to do is rank them from 1 through 3. Then you start to go in and you identify which agents appear to have the most commercial listings. Because you don't know, unless you've got a referral to an agent, you don't know what agent's going to be good. So you have to start somewhere. I would suggest you look in the commercial listings section and see who's got the most commercial listings. That is usually a good indicator that they are well versed in commercial. Then contact 3 or 4 agents for information. Don't commit to any of them at this point in time. What you're doing is you're just getting a sense of what they're like, who you want to work for or work with. It's sort of a pre-interview process. Also search the MLS commercial, which is called ICX, Kijiji, newspapers, etc. Locate some potential properties within the acceptable price range that you are prepared to buy. Go in here. There we go. So once you've found a market and properties, now what? As I mentioned before, property management is critical to your success, but the entire team is critical to your success, especially for long distance acquisitions. So what you're going to do is interview the realtors. They need to understand you, and you understand them, and there has to be trust between the two of you as well. Then property management. How many companies are actually available in the market that you're looking to purchase? Try and use references, get some references from them, check out their services, check out their rates, compare them, because one could be offering a low rate of 4% to manage your building, but it could end up costing you 7 or 8% because of all the hidden fees they have. Whereas the other company that's offering a 6% all-inclusive may end up being just as good a property management company and cost you less money because their rate includes a lot of the services. You also want to make sure that you've got good handyman or handywoman available that can do all of the minor repairs. So we're not talking major repairs that you'd hire a contractor out to, but to have a handyman that can go in and turn over an apartment, by painting it, changing the kitchen taps, changing a bathroom vanity, etc. All these little things, you definitely want a handy person available for that. When you're looking for a deal, you definitely need to help the realtor out, provide them with some criteria so that they know what it is you're looking for. Give them a price range, location, style of what you're looking for. You also want to have a realtor who is willing to go door knocking for you. So not just an agent who's willing to scour the MLS, you can do that as well. However, an agent will also have what they call pocket listings, people that they've talked to who are thinking about selling, or people that the agent thinks, he might be interested in selling. I'm going to go ask them. Or they'll hear other agents have pocket listings as well, listings that are coming up. So that's the advantage of using a realtor, as they've got this inside information and knowledge. But you also want to have one who is a little bit proactive and willing to go out there and door knock and look for properties. A property that I mentioned I owned earlier that I ended up selling about a year after I purchased it. I actually sold that because an agent approached me to see if I would be interested in selling the property. And it all worked out. But that agent was taking the initiative and approached me to see if I was willing to sell. Hadn't marketed it, hadn't even considered it at that point in time yet. Scour all the papers, the local papers and the internet. Look for FSBOs. This is a big one that a lot of people overlook. Check out the for rent section. Identify rental properties that have rent ads in there that may be of interest to you as well. Phone them, and if you are speaking with the owner of the property, then ask if they would be interested in selling. If you're speaking with the property management company for that property, try and find out who the owner is, and then contact the owner and see if they would be interested in selling. Especially if you see a lot of ads for the same property and keep showing up, that means there's a high turnover, so you may be getting a very frustrated seller. Also be proactive and place ads yourself. Go out there and place in the free newspapers or on the internet, or put bandit signs up. Those are the core plast signs that you see plastered around on telephone poles sometimes, where it says, "I buy properties, any size, any condition." You can have that in newspaper ads as well. And it doesn't mean that just because you say that in an ad doesn't mean that you're committed to doing it. But what it does is it gets the phone ringing, people calling you. So it's a great strategy. I bought a couple properties that way as well. Visit and interview in person. So once you've done all of this long distance due diligence, make sure you get out there and put boots on the ground. talk to the realtors, get them to show you some listings, some properties. While you're there, visit some property management companies and interview them. Ask for some references. Ask for a list of properties that they actually manage, and go and visit those properties and potentially interview the landlords and the tenants of those property management companies as well. The tenants, you have to temper what you hear from the tenants, because tenants love to complain about the landlords and the property management company, because it seems like you can never do enough to satisfy your tenants. So you have to temper that, but read between the lines and get a feeling for what's true and what's not, and how the building is being operated. So if you're satisfied and you've got a great team, then absolutely move forward to the next step. If your team is okay, then don't force it. Back off, keep it in mind, keep looking, keep searching, keep trying to build that team. However, if you can't build a team, or it's a bad team, the property management company just sucks, or you can't find good handyman service. I actually was in a market where there were some pretty decent deals to be had, but there was no, the construction companies, like the people who were contractors, they were so busy they had no time for the small maintenance issues, and there was no good handymen available in that market. And this was in a city of about 15,000, which I found very surprising. But the realtor was very open and honest and said this is a huge challenge for us, is to find good quality handy people around here. So you know what are your top 3 markets where you want to invest, and you know what you can afford. You know there are potential deals, so you need to build your team, which will eventually result in a road trip in order to confirm the market conditions and build relationships with the team members. After determining the market price range, you've built the team, you can get started. Now you can start looking for deals and analyzing deals and making offers. So you found a property. You do a quick analysis. You determine what the GRM is. Is that a yes or no? The cost per door, yes or no? The cap rate, yes or no? If you've got yeses, then you analyze the deal based upon the numbers provided to you. After that, you analyze the numbers, you analyze that based upon the expenses you believe should be there. Now, if it's still a yes, that's when you make an offer. And we'll get into making an offer later on in the program, but just as a guideline, you make your initial offer around 10% below asking price, never below, because if you do that, you risk offending the seller, and you now made it more confrontational and more difficult to negotiate. So we'll be talking about how to make offers more in Module 6. You include the following conditions: subject to viewing, subject to financing, inspection, subject to receipt of all the documents such as utility bills, taxes, leases, etc., and subject to your lawyer's review, approval. So knowing how to analyze at a high level using GRM, cap, and cost per door, you can quickly and easily find potential deals. So this allows you to scan properties, and within a matter of a minute, 2 minutes most, you're able to determine whether this is a property of interest or not. Next, you analyze the potential deals based upon the information provided and make your offer based upon whether you feel it is a good deal or not. I've included a lot of forms and documents here from the multi-unit purchase for CMHC, finance information and loan application, information that you want to start to gather when you make your application. I've included some joint venture agreements, both simplified and more detailed, a document about vendor financing, the pros and cons, to help you understand those pros and cons so that you can educate a potential seller about the benefits of doing a vendor take-back. I've also included a plan, a 10-year plan to create $1 million. So this is a step-by-step plan to create 100 doors, $10,000 cash, and $1 million net worth in 10 years. Your homework is to determine what is your credit score, or FICO, beacon score. Create an opportunity list. So identify all the people in your world, family, friends, neighbors, co-workers, etc. And I call this an opportunity list. Write their names down the left-hand side. down the center of the page, you write down what you think, just what your gut says they have to invest, and you're going to then present to these individuals the opportunity. You're not going to approach them and try and beg them for money, so don't freak out about that. We'll come back to this opportunity list later. Calculate what your personal net worth is. Create a top 3 list of potential markets based upon the stars and dog analysis within an hour to an hour and a half from your home, or 3 hours and beyond. Identify the team members. So in the area that you're currently looking to invest, who are your team members? Their name, address, and realtors, property management companies, etc. Identify 3 potential properties that fit your criteria. So there's a lot of work in this homework assignment, but if you're serious about this, this is what you need to do in order to move forward. And as always, if you need any help or any support, you can contact Jen for tech support at info@arcawealthacademy.com. For myself, any questions you have about the program, the course, just contact me at apartmentwealthgeneration@gmail.com. Thank you very much. Have yourself a great day, and we'll see you for the next module.